Today we will be studying about pollination. We are still in chapter 2, flower, fruit and seed. So for today's topic we have taken pollination. The first thing is the definition of pollination. The process of pollination involves the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower. That is pollination. What is it? Transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the same flower or another flower. Okay? So that is pollination. In the previous class also I told you about pollination that will be starting from today. Now look at this. This is the anther, okay? And these small circles, what you see here, these are the pollen grains. So this goes to the stigma here, okay? And some agents are there, just like this bee you can see. They help in pollination to transfer the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Now this transfer of pollen grains to the stigma can take place in 3 different ways. The transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma can take place in 3 different ways. Now let's see this. The first one here, how the transfer takes place. Transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of same flower. That means in only one flower. Thus only one flower is involved. Next one, the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of another flower but of the same plant. In one plant only, from one flower to another, from anther to stigma, this transfer takes place. Now here, 2 flowers are involved but of the same plant. That means in one plant, many flowers are there, so one flower to another, from anther to the stigma of another flower but in the same plant. This is the second way. The third one is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower of another plant of the same type. So here the transfer takes place from one plant to another. Here 2 plants are involved. Okay? From the anther to the stigma of a flower of another plant but of the same type. Here 2 flowers of different plants but of the same type are involved. Once again, in the first one, only one flower is involved, so from anther to stigma. In the second one, 2 flowers are involved, but of the same plant. In one plant only, from one flower to another. In the third one, from one flower to another flower of another plant, but of the same type, same species. So these are the 3 ways. In the diagram also, you can understand it. This is number 1. Here you can see anther and stigma. So the pollen grains are transferred from anther to the stigma of the same flower. Number 2. Here from one flower to another, from anther to the stigma of another flower but of the same plant. And the third one here is from the anther to the stigma of another flower of another plant but of the same species. When you look at these 2 plants, they look same, so they are from the same species. Okay? So these are the 3 ways, 3 different ways in which pollen grains are transferred from anther to the stigma. Now types of pollination. So there are 2 types of pollination. The first one is self-pollination and the other one is cross-pollination. Self-pollination you can see here. This is the anther. Okay. So from anther to the stigma, these pollen grains are being transferred to stigma, which is the female part. Okay. Of the same flower or another flower of the same plant. This is self-pollination. And the next one is from anther to the stigma of another flower of another plant, but of the same type, same species. In details, self-pollination. So one by one we will be reading about these types of pollination. Self-pollination. Here you see the pollen grains are transferred from the anther to stigma, okay, of the same flower or another flower of the same plant. Now let us read this. Self-pollination takes place when pollen grains from anther of a flower are transferred to the stigma of the same or another flower of the same plant. Okay, so here only one plant is involved. Okay, so certain points are there which you should keep it in your mind. You should remember points to remember. Now let us see. It can take place in bisexual flower. Bisexual flower means in, like this one is a bisexual flower, female part is also there and male part is also there. So it takes place in the bisexual flower. It can also take place in the unisexual flowers where both male and female flowers are born on the same plant. If male and female flower both are there in the same plant, then also you can have self-pollination. But in both these cases, only one plant is involved. We are talking about only one plant, either in the same flower or another flower, but in the same plant. The last one, for self-pollination, the anther and the stigma must mature at the same time. Otherwise, self-pollination will not take place. It will not be fruitful. Then comes the cross-pollination. Here, two plants are involved. Now look at this. This is plant A and this is plant B. So the pollen grains you can see green in color. So these pollen grains are transferred from anther to the stigma of another flower of another plant, but of the same species. The same thing is written here. The definition of cross-pollination. Cross-pollination in flowers take place when pollen grains from anther of a flower are transferred to the stigma of another flower of another plant of the same species. Now here, the point which you have to remember is two plants of the same species are involved in cross-pollination. In self-pollination, only one plant was involved. Here, two plants are involved in cross-pollination. As I have shown you here, plant A and plant B. Now, the pollen grains are transferred from anther to the stigma through various agents of pollination. Okay? And what are these agents? Wind, insects, animals, birds, water, all these things are called agents of pollination because they help in the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Let us see. So these are the various agents of pollination. Insects, animals, wind and water. One by one we'll explain this. The first one is pollination by insects. You must have seen the butterflies, the bees. They come and sit on the flower, okay, in order to take the nectar, the sweet fluid of the flower. And when they visit another flower, what happens? In the meantime, the pollen grains get stuck to their body parts, and when they visit another flower, they leave it, they drop it on the stigma of another flower. And that's how this pollination takes place. Pollination by insects. There are many insects that visit a flower to collect the nectar. Nectar is the sweet liquid of the flowers, such as bees, butterflies, beetles, etc. You must have seen them on the flowers. When they suck the nectar from the flower, the pollen grains get stuck to their bodies. Look at this. So here you can see the bee. Here also you can see the bees. Okay. So these are the insects which visit the flower to collect their food, that is nectar. Such flowers which are pollinated by insects are called entomophilous flowers. Entomophilous flowers. Now, as I told you, bees are there. You can see the butterflies also. Okay, so they also visit the flowers, and this you are very much familiar. You play with this sometimes, right? The beetles. So look here, the bees, the butterflies, and the beetles. They are visiting the flowers to collect the nectar, to get the food. And this type of flowers, they are very, very attractive, colored flowers, big, okay, just to attract the insects. They are brightly colored, they have brightly colored petals to attract the insects. They have got sweet smell. Most of the flowers are there with the sweet smell. That is why we smell the flowers. Sticky pollen grains. So pollen grains are sticky, and that is why they get stuck to the body parts of these insects. And sticky pollen grains and stigma. Stigma is also sticky so that it can be left on the stigma. This is the most common means of pollination. Pollination takes place by this, by insects. Is the most common way. And examples are given: rose and marigold. These are the flowers where pollination by insects take place. Next we have what? Pollination by animals. Now here you can see animals such as birds, squirrels, bats, they also help in pollination. And this type of flowers are called zoophilous flowers. These flowers produce plenty of nectar, and which is the food of these small animals. But they will not have scent. Unlike the previous one, they don't have sweet smell. They are colored, especially red and orange, to attract the birds, squirrels, and bats. Among animals, snails and bats and birds are the main agents of pollination. You must have heard about hummingbird, honey thrushes. These are the most common pollinating agents. And one more interesting fact is there, that elephant, which is an animal, very big animal, is also helps in pollination of Rafflesia, which has got the largest flower. Okay, so Rafflesia is pollinated by elephant. Now look at this. Here you can see how birds are helping in pollination. So these are the hummingbird you can see in the picture, and this is a squirrel helping in pollination. And the rest three are there. You can see these are the bats. Okay, these are mammals. They also help in pollination. So this was all about pollination by animals. Now comes pollination by wind. Pollination by wind. The flowers which are pollinated by wind are called anemophilous flowers. Such flowers are generally small. They are very unattractive, sometimes green in color. Okay, small. They do not produce nectar or scent. They don't have, because they need not to attract any of the animals or insects. They just depend on the wind to be pollinated. The petals of the flowers are not colored. They are often green colored. They are produced in large quantity. The pollen grains are produced in a large quantity. Why? Because sometimes we say that this is a wasteful process. All the pollen grains which are transferred by wind may not reach to the stigma of the flowers, and that is why they produce large numbers so that a very few can reach to the stigma of the flower. as a very few may reach to the stigma of flower. The stigmas of such flowers are large, feathery and hang out. So they are large, they are feathery tailed, so that they can collect all the possible pollen grains carried by wind in them. This includes maize, rice, paddy, wheat and pine. So their flowers are unattractive, very small, sometimes green in color. So when the wind blows, then these pollen grains are transferred from anther to the stigma. Look at this. It's the wheat. Okay, and these are the various examples of the flowers which are pollinated by the help of wind. Okay, so now the last one is there, and that is pollination by water. So this takes place in the aquatic plants, the plants which live in water. Do you remember any plant which live in water? Hydrilla and Vallisneria. They are the best example for this type of pollination. Pollination by water. Cross-pollination takes place with the help of water in some flowers. Before this, it was the wind which was carrying the seeds. Now it is the water which is carrying the pollens. This type of flowers are called hydrophilous flowers. Example, Vallisneria and Hydrilla. In Vallisneria, now look here. This is the plant of Vallisneria, the aquatic plant. So you can see the ribbon-like leaves are there, okay? And the red ones which you see here, these are the flowers. Here it's not that clear, but the male flowers are there which are floating on the surface of surface of water. And this is, you can see, this is the female flower with a very long stalk. It has come up to the surface of water. So all these male flowers are moving on the surface of the flower, and here the pollination takes place in the female flower. The pollens from the flower to the female flower it goes. Okay. So both the plants are there, male and female. Okay. Now here you can see this is the male inflorescence. Now from here only the flowers, once they are matured, the flowers are detached and they start moving on the, floating on the surface of water. At the same time, it has got the female flower which comes up with a long stalk and receives the pollen grains. As the plant gets matured, the male flower gets detached and floats on the water. So from here it goes and it is floating on the water surface. With the help of water current, when male flower comes in contact with the female flower, this is the female flower here, okay, and this is the female flower, it is a distillate flower, that means female flower. The transfer of pollen from male flower to the stigma of the female flower takes place on the surface of the water. These flowers also produce pollen grains in large number, large quantity. Why? Because many are wasted. Very few, they reach up to the female flower. So this was all about pollination by water. Two best examples are Vallisneria and Hydrilla. And that's all for today. Stay home, stay safe, and have a great day. Okay? Bye.